Ambassador Jake Morrison stepped off the transport shuttle with the kind of smile that could sell insurance to a dead person. He straightened his tie, grabbed his briefcase full of Earth snacks and get well cards, and whistled his way toward the towering spires of the Galactic Senate building. If he'd known that his cheerful demeanor was about to trigger the largest military alert in galactic history, he probably would have whistled louder just for fun. The thing about humans, you see, is that the rest of the galaxy had been expecting them for about 3 centuries. And by expecting, I mean dreading. Every species had heard the stories. Humans were the ones who domesticated wolves by staring at them really hard. Humans were the ones who looked at the food chain and said, "You know what? I think I'll start at the top and work my way down." Humans were the species that figured out how to split atoms and immediately thought, "Hey, let's make this into a weapon." So when the first human diplomat finally showed up at the Galactic Senate, Senator Glorbnik nearly molted his exoskeleton right there in the reception hall. Sweet cosmic radiation, Glorbnik chittered to his aide, his 6 eyes all focused on Jake's approaching figure. "Look at it. Look how it walks. So confident, so predatory. It's probably calculating how many of us it can take down before security arrives." Captain Vex, the Senate's head of security, was already reaching for his plasma rifle. Vex was a 7-foot-tall reptilian whose idea of diplomacy involved showing people his collection of ceremonial battle scars. "Should I neutralize the threat, Senator?" "No, no," Glorbnik whispered frantically. "We must observe its behavior patterns. Study its tactics. This creature has traveled across the galaxy for a reason, and I doubt it's to exchange recipes." Jake, meanwhile, had spotted the welcoming committee and was practically bouncing on his toes with excitement. "Hi there," he called out, waving enthusiastically. "I'm Jake Morrison, Earth's new ambassador. I am so excited to be here. I brought cookies." The sound that emerged from Senator Glorbnik's throat was somewhere between a death rattle and a tea kettle having an existential crisis. Captain Vex's hand tightened on his weapon. "Did it just offer us food?" Vex growled. "This is clearly some sort of psychological warfare to lure us into a false sense of security with sustenance, then strike when we're vulnerable." Jake approached with the unstoppable enthusiasm of a golden retriever who'd just learned what tennis balls were. "I know this is our first meeting, but I was thinking, maybe I could help out around here? You know, pitch in, lend a hand, really become part of the team." The silence that followed was the kind usually reserved for funeral homes and tax audits. Senator Glorbnik's compound eyes began twitching in sequence. "Help, out, out, absolutely." Jake beamed. "I'm a real people person. Well, people and whatever you all are. No offense. I'm sure you're all lovely in your own unique, possibly terrifying ways." And that's when the emergency alarms started going off. Dr. Flemsworth was having what humans might generously call a mental breakdown, though his species called it acute philosophical displacement with a side of existential nausea. As the Senate's leading expert on aggressive species psychology, he'd been summoned to analyze the human threat. The problem was, every time he tried to identify the threat, all he found was a guy who'd spent the morning organizing the supply closet by color and efficiency rating. "Senator Glorbnik," Dr. Flemsworth wheezed through his breathing apparatus, "I've been observing the human for 6 hours. It has alphabetized our filing system, repaired 3 broken coffee machines, and somehow convinced the janitorial staff to accept overtime pay instead of ritual combat wages." "Clearly a long-term infiltration strategy," Glorbnik replied, his antennae twitching with paranoia. "It's establishing trust before the inevitable betrayal, a classic predator behavior." Jake poked his head into the conference room, still wearing that infuriatingly genuine smile. "Hey, sorry to interrupt, but I noticed your climate control system is making a weird grinding noise. I used to do HVAC work back in college, so I could take a look if you want. Also, Edo, I brought some trail mix from Earth. It's got nuts and dried fruit and little chocolate pieces. The chocolate might be toxic to some of you, so I made little labels." The room fell silent except for the sound of Dr. Flemsworth hyperventilating into his breathing apparatus. Fables, Captain Vex repeated slowly. It's cataloguing our dietary weaknesses for our safety. Jake added cheerfully, can't have anyone going into anaphylactic shock at our first diplomatic dinner. Speaking of which, I was thinking we could do a potluck next week. I make a mean potato salad, and I'd love to try some of your traditional foods. Well, assuming they won't kill me, aha. Senator Glorbnik's left eye began twitching independently of the other 5. It wants to consume our cultural sustenance. This is clearly reconnaissance for invasion planning. Jake tilted his head like a confused puppy. Invasion? Oh no, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm here for diplomatic relations. You know, peace, friendship, maybe some trade agreements that benefit everyone. I brought some preliminary proposals if you'd like to look them over. He reached into his briefcase, and Captain Vex immediately drew his weapon. Don't move, human. Jake froze, holding a manila folder decorated with smiley face stickers. Okay. It's just paperwork though, and some more cookies. Oatmeal raisin this time. I wasn't sure what everyone's dietary restrictions were, so I made them vegan and gluten-free. Dr. Flemsworth made a noise like a deflating balloon. It's considerate of our biological needs. This level of tactical empathy is unprecedented. We need to evacuate the building immediately. Evacuate? Jake looked genuinely concerned. Is there a fire? Should I help coordinate the evacuation? I was a volunteer firefighter back home. And that's when Senator Glorbnik fainted, all 6 of his legs giving out simultaneously. The last thing he heard before losing consciousness was Jake asking if anyone knew CPR for insectoid species, because he was pretty sure the chest compressions would be different. By day 3, Jake had become the most feared entity in the Galactic Senate building, primarily because he kept doing things like watering the office plants and asking people about their families. The maintenance staff had started wearing body armor to work, convinced that Jake's cheerful good morning greetings were some form of psychological torture designed to break their will to resist. Report, Senator Glorbnik demanded, having recovered from his fainting spell but not from his fundamental terror of human niceness. Captain Vex consulted his data pad with the grim expression of someone reading casualty reports. The human has fixed 17 broken devices, organized 4 different filing systems, and somehow convinced the cafeteria staff to start serving fresh fruit. But it also learned the names of every security guard and asked about their hobbies. Their hobbies? Glorbnik's voice reached a pitch that only dogs and very anxious insects could hear. A personal reconnaissance, Dr. Flemsworth confirmed, nodding sagely. It's mapping our individual psychological profiles through seemingly innocent conversation. Guard Captain Zorb mentioned his collection of vintage weapon magazines, and the human immediately offered to bring him some Earth military history books. See? Glorbnik chittered frantically. It's studying our weapons technology under the guise of friendship. Jake chose that moment to knock on the conference room door, which he'd apparently learned to do at exactly the volume that wouldn't startle anyone but would still be clearly audible. Even his knocking was considerate. Come in, Vex growled, his hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. Hey everyone. Jake entered carrying a tray of what appeared to be beverages and a small potted plant. I noticed the conference room gets pretty stuffy during long meetings, so I brought some fresh air freshener. It's a lavender plant from Earth. Super low maintenance, and it smells great. Also, I made coffee for everyone. Well, coffee for the species that can process caffeine, herbal tea for the others, and I brought some of that mineral water stuff for anyone with silicon-based biology. The silence stretched on until Dr. Flemsworth whispered, "It knows our biological compositions." "Of course I do," Jake said, setting down the tray with practiced efficiency. "I read everyone's dietary and environmental needs reports before I got here. Basic preparation, right? I mean, you wouldn't want me accidentally poisoning anyone with incompatible foods or atmospheres." Captain Vex stared at the steaming mug Jake had placed in front of him. "You researched our biological needs." "Sure. I spent months studying galactic species biology, cultural norms, diplomatic protocols. I even learned some basic phrases in everyone's languages, though I'm probably butchering the pronunciation. Jake's smile somehow got even brighter. I really want to make a good impression. Senator Glorbnik began making a sound like a coffee grinder having an argument with a garbage disposal. And months of preparation. Extensive biological research, linguistic infiltration protocols. I prefer to think of it as being prepared, Jake laughed. My mom always said, proper preparation prevents poor performance. Though she usually said it when I forgot to do my homework, so maybe it doesn't apply to interstellar diplomacy. Dr. Flemsworth was furiously scribbling notes. It references its family structure, a possible indication of pack-hunting behavior passed down through generational knowledge transfer. Jake picked up the potted plant and moved it slightly to catch better light from the window. Oh, Dr. Flemsworth, I've been meaning to ask. How's your research going? I know you're studying human behavior patterns. If you need any primary source material, I'm happy to answer questions. I love talking about Earth and human culture. The doctor's breathing apparatus fogged up completely. It's offering to assist in its own psychological profiling. This level of tactical transparency is beyond our current understanding of warfare psychology. Warfare? Jake looked genuinely puzzled. I thought you were just trying to understand how humans think so we can all get along better. Isn't that what diplomacy is all about? And that's when Senator Glorbnik realized that the human's most terrifying weapon wasn't aggression or violence. It was the complete, genuine, utterly sincere desire to be helpful. The emergency session of the Galactic Senate had been called for dawn, which was unfortunate because dawn on the Senate planet lasted about 6 minutes and occurred every 4 hours. Senator Glorbnik had managed to gather representatives from 47 different species, all of whom were now crammed into the main assembly hall, whispering among themselves like teenagers planning a surprise party, except instead of cake and balloons. They were discussing humanity's apparent weaponization of basic decency. Fellow beings. Glorbnik began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd been personally victimized by aggressive helpfulness. We are facing an unprecedented threat. The human has been among us for 1 standard week, and in that time, it has systematically infiltrated every aspect of our daily operations through what can only be described as tactical kindness. Representative Blurble from the aquatic territories raised a tentacle. Senator, with respect, perhaps you're overreacting. My aide mentioned that the human fixed our water filtration system without being asked. Exactly. Glorbnik chittered triumphantly. It identified a critical infrastructure vulnerability and addressed it before we even realized we had a problem. A classic preparation for occupation. Ambassador Thunk from the Rock People cluster shifted his considerable mass and spoke in a voice like grinding continental plates. Human also helped my secretary organize her geological samples by mineral composition and historical significance. It was very educational. Educational infiltration of our scientific databases. Captain Vex interjected grimly. It's learning our resource management techniques. Dr. Flemsworth stood up, clutching his latest behavioral analysis report like a shield. I've been monitoring the human's activity patterns for detailed study. Yesterday, it spent 3 hours helping the janitorial staff develop a more efficient cleaning schedule. When I asked it why, it said, and I quote, "Everyone deserves to go home to their families at a reasonable time." The assembly hall erupted in gasps and concerned chittering. It knows about our family structures, someone shouted from the back. It's targeting our emotional vulnerabilities, added another voice. Representative Glim from the Crystalline Collective chimed in with a sound like wind through crystal caves. The human offered to teach our younglings what it called Earth games during their recreation period. Games with names like tag and hide and seek. The hall fell silent as the implications sank in. Training exercises, Captain Vex said slowly. It's teaching our children military tactics disguised as entertainment. Jake chose that exact moment to walk into the assembly hall, carrying a large basket and wearing what appeared to be an apron covered in cheerful earth animals. The sight of several hundred alien representatives staring at him in complete silence might have intimidated a lesser human. but Jake just smiled and waved. "Oh, wow. Is this a big meeting? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just bringing lunch for the cleaning crew and security staff. They've been working extra hard lately, and I thought they could use some appreciation." He held up the basket. "I made sandwiches. Well, sandwich equivalents appropriate for different digestive systems. There's enough for everyone if anyone's hungry." The silence stretched on until Representative Blurble whispered, "It's attempting to feed the entire governing body." "Biological warfare through nutrition," Dr. Flemsworth confirmed, his voice shaking. "It's trying to create dependency relationships through sustenance provision." Jake's smile faltered slightly. "I'm sorry, did I do something wrong? I just thought people might be hungry. Meetings can go long, and low blood sugar makes everyone grumpy. Well, blood sugar or whatever equivalent you all have." Senator Glorbnik stood up on all 6 legs, pointing dramatically at Jake with his primary appendage. "There, do you see? It admits to understanding our metabolic processes and their effect on cognitive function. This creature is attempting to manipulate our decision-making capacity through strategic nutritional intervention." Jake blinked a few times, then looked down at his basket of sandwiches, then back at the assembled representatives. "You know what? I think there might be a communication issue here. Should I maybe come back later?" And that's when the entire Galactic Senate simultaneously reached for their panic buttons. Pip was what humans might call an intern, though her species called it educational servitude with minimal compensation and maximum anxiety. She was young, idealistic, and possessed the kind of curiosity that made her species' elders worry about her life choices. More importantly, she was the only being in the entire Galactic Senate building who hadn't yet developed a paralyzing fear of Jake Morrison and his relentless campaign of helpfulness. She found Jake in the break room at 0300 hours, sitting alone at a table with a cup of coffee and what appeared to be a handwritten list. He looked, for the first time since arriving, slightly less than perfectly cheerful. Excuse me," Pip said, her translator unit struggling with her nervous warbling. "Ambassador Morrison?" Jake looked up and smiled, though it seemed a bit tired around the edges. "Oh, hi there. I don't think we've met. Jake Morrison, Earth's diplomatic representative and apparent harbinger of doom." "You are?" Pip. "I'm an intern with the Cultural Integration Department. I've been observing, well, everyone's been talking about how I'm apparently the most terrifying thing to hit the galaxy since the invention of weapons-grade plutonium." Jake gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Please sit. I could use some company that doesn't involve someone reaching for a weapon or fainting." Pip settled into the chair, her large eyes fixed on Jake's face. "Are you really planning to conquer the galaxy through strategic kindness?" Jake stared at her for a long moment, then started laughing. Not the polite, diplomatic laughter he'd been using all week, but genuine, slightly hysterical human laughter. "Oh my God," he wheezed, wiping his eyes. "Is that what everyone thinks? That I'm some kind of kindness-based infiltration specialist?" "Well, yes." Jake held up his list, which Pip could now see was titled Ways to Make Friends at Work. "Pip, I'm going to tell you something that's apparently going to blow everyone's minds. I'm just trying to be nice. That's it. That's the whole plan. I fix things because I like fixing things. I bring food because sharing meals makes people happy. I ask about families because I'm interested in people's lives." Pip's translator made a small, confused beeping sound. "But why?" "Because that's what humans do. We're social creatures. We like helping each other. We like being useful. We like making other people's lives a little bit easier or happier." Jake leaned back in his chair. "I mean, sure, we've got our problems. We invented war and taxes and pineapple on pizza. But mostly we just want to get along with everyone." "But your reputation," Pip said weakly, "at the stories about human aggression and violence." "Oh, we can absolutely be violent when we need to be," Jake said cheerfully. "If someone threatens our families or our friends or our way of life, we will absolutely wreck their entire existence. But that's defensive violence, The rest of the time, we're just nice. Pip sat in silence for several minutes, processing this information. I need to tell the Senate. Good luck with that, Jake laughed. I tried explaining it to Senator Glorbnik yesterday, and he started hyperventilating so hard his breathing apparatus fogged up. The next morning, Pip stood before the emergency Senate session with the confidence of someone who'd just figured out that the monster under the bed was actually just a pile of laundry. Honorable representatives, she began, I have discovered the truth about human behavioral patterns. Senator Glorbnik leaned forward eagerly. Have you identified their invasion timeline? They're not invading anyone, Pip said simply. They're just nice. Eh? The silence that followed was somehow even more disturbing than all the previous panicked discussions combined. Nice? Dr. Flemsworth repeated, as if the word were a foreign concept. Nice, Pip confirmed. Ambassador Morrison fixes things because he likes fixing things. He brings food because sharing food makes people happy. He asks about our families because he's genuinely interested in our lives. There's no ulterior motive. No hidden agenda, no strategic manipulation. He's just a nice person who wants to help. Representative Blurble raised a tentacle tentatively. But surely there must be some evolutionary advantage to such behavior, some survival benefit. There is, Pip said. Humans are pack hunters who evolved to survive through cooperation. Being nice to each other is literally hardwired into their DNA. It's not a weapon. It's just how they are. The assembly hall erupted in the most terrified chittering, warbling and rumbling in Senate history. Because if humans could be this effective at psychological warfare without even trying, what would happen when they actually put some effort into it? Jake stood before the Galactic Senate 3 days later, holding a small potted plant and wearing his best diplomatic tie, which featured tiny earth animals being friends with each other. The assembled representatives watched him with the kind of nervous attention usually reserved for unexploded ordnance or tax auditors. So Jake began, his usual cheerful demeanor slightly tempered by the realization that he'd been accidentally terrorizing an entire galactic government. I understand there's been some confusion about my intentions here. Senator Glorbnik's antennae twitched nervously. Ambassador Morrison, we've been informed that your species' aggressive helpfulness is simply natural behavior. That's right, Jake nodded. We're not trying to conquer anyone, we just like being useful. It makes us happy when other people are happy. It's not complicated. But surely, Dr. Flemsworth interjected, there must be some strategic advantage to this behavioral pattern. Jake thought about it for a moment. Well, I guess when everyone around you is happy and healthy and has their basic needs met, they're less likely to try to kill you. But that's more of a pleasant side effect than a strategic goal. Captain Vex leaned forward suspiciously. And what do you propose we do with this information? Maybe try being nice back? Jake suggested with a shrug. I mean, it's not mandatory or anything, but it might make everyone's day-to-day life a little more pleasant. In worst-case scenario, people are slightly happier than they were before. The representatives exchanged uncertain glances. The concept of strategic niceness was apparently easier to accept than genuine, non-strategic niceness. We could attempt a trial period, Senator Glorbnik said carefully. Limited niceness protocols. Purely experimental. And so, for the next week, the Galactic Senate tentatively experimented with being nice to each other. Representatives said please and thank you. Staff members asked about each other's families. Someone brought donuts to a committee meeting, and nobody died of poisoning. To everyone's shock and mild horror, it actually worked. Ratings ran more smoothly. Interdepartmental cooperation improved. The general stress level in the building dropped noticeably. After 2 weeks of successful niceness protocols, the Senate voted unanimously to accept Earth into the galactic community as a full member species. Congratulations, Ambassador Morrison, Senator Glorbnik said, extending his primary appendage for what Jake had taught him was called a handshake. Welcome to the Galactic Senate. Thanks. Jake beamed, shaking hands with enthusiasm that no longer triggered fight or flight responses. I'm really excited to get started. I have so many ideas for ways we can all help each other out." It was Captain Vex who voiced what everyone was thinking. "Ambassador, if your species can be this effective at psychological manipulation without even trying, what happens when you decide to actually put some effort into it?" Jake's smile took on a slightly different quality. Not malicious exactly, but thoughtful. "Well," he said cheerfully, "I was thinking we could start with a galaxy-wide random acts of kindness day. You know, really get everyone in the spirit of helping each other out. I've already got some preliminary ideas for organization and coordination." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of several dozen species simultaneously reconsidering their life choices. As Jake continued outlining his plans for systematic galactic niceness, Senator Glorbnik realized they'd made a terrible mistake. They'd been afraid of human rage and violence, but those were things they understood. Those were things they could fight against. Kindness, as it turned out, was completely irresistible, and humans, apparently, were very, very good at it. The galaxy was doomed to become a much nicer place, whether it wanted to or not.